Welcome to the third video in the series about how to make better things faster with steel threads. This is where we finally get into the details of how to make a steel thread. The first two videos covered what a steel thread is and why to use them to accelerate progress on all kinds of creative work. Before we dive into the how, here's a quick recap. Steel threads are an iterative approach to creative work that comes from software engineering, although even in tech, it's not terribly well known. An individual steel thread is a miniature version of your whole project. You move through all the major steps of the project, doing a very slender version of each step. Using this approach helps you get clarity, it builds and sustains motivation, and it can improve the quality and frequency of the feedback we're getting as we build. Steel threads don't eliminate uncertainty, ambiguity, or complexity, but they do help us navigate the unknown. I've distilled the process of making a steel thread to 4 steps. First, decide on your scope. What are the essential steps of your project? How deep do you need to go on each step for the steel thread? Next, write out the specific tasks for each step. I recommend doing this at a very granular scale, especially early in the process. Third, a crucial part of making a steel thread is setting an aggressive time box and sticking to it. That means setting a deadline. The fourth step helps us stick to the deadline. We end each steel thread by showing our work to other people in a demo. We'll explore each of these steps today, but keep in mind, this is a very quick video, it's an introduction, and it's going to be a little cartoonish. I'm going to gloss some details that will matter if you start using this approach in your own work, but it's easier to grasp the basics if we keep things very simple. So, first, decide on your scope. Easier said than done. I've found that a good starting point is just to ask, what are the basic steps to complete this project? With most people, if I ask them that, they can pretty quickly write down a handful of key steps. And in the beginning, getting it right is much less important than getting moving. So if you're trying this out, just get something on paper. That's very much in the spirit of steel threads. When you're thinking about scope, think about how to make a version of your project that touches each step while being as small as possible. Nothing beats a real-world example, so here's how I broke things down when I started working on this YouTube series. First, I needed a script. For the first steel thread, that was just an outline that I could riff on. I wanted to use slides, so I needed a slide deck. I needed to record a video, edit the video, upload it to YouTube, and publish the video. Publishing meant sharing it with at least one person, which I was going to do anyway because demos. Now, left to my own devices, I can easily spend 3 weeks fussing with a single step, making fancy slides, agonizing over the script, doing all kinds of research. What's so powerful about the steel thread approach is that I had to move through all of the steps and I had to do it quickly. Once I had my steps identified, I could write out my task list. My rule of thumb during project planning is each task should be something I think will take at most a couple of hours. If I have a task that's much bigger than that, I break it down into smaller pieces, which is what I mean by granular. The tasks should be grains of sand, not big boulders. Side note, your time estimates will be wrong, and that is fine. This is about thinking things through as well as you can, and then taking action to find out where you were miscalibrated. So, let's look at the task list for my first YouTube video, Steel Thread. I decided to draft an outline on paper. I gave myself about an hour for that. Next was a rough slide deck. I decided to start in Google Slides, easy. I budgeted 2 hours for that, which meant I had to focus on key concepts instead of going down rabbit holes, finding graphics or trying out 20 different fonts. Too early for that. Next, I'd record a few rough takes. I figured that in an hour, I could record 3 or 4 takes of a 10-minute video. And I decided to do those early takes in Zoom, mainly because there was 0 startup cost. I use Zoom every day, so I wouldn't have to figure anything out. This was my first time making YouTube videos, and I needed some new tools, so I opted for the fastest tools instead of the best tools. For example, I picked Descript because I already kind of knew how to use it for editing, and I could always change to something else later. I budgeted 2 hours to do a rough edit and cut in some stock music. Big surprise, it took longer than 2 hours. Then I would upload to YouTube as a private video. This is a steel thread, not an MVP, not a finished product. So I wasn't ready to actually publish to the world, but I still wanted to go through the full process. The last task would be the demo. I would share the private video with some reviewers and get some feedback. Notice how I managed to create a fairly small task for each step of the project. I got a lot of momentum right out of the gate. And I learned a lot. Lighting, sound, pacing, what I was doing during the recording that made editing harder later. Lots of details about YouTube that I hadn't known about. I learned all of that in the very first week. Which leads us to the importance of setting a time box. A time box is just a way of saying give yourself a deadline and stop when you hit the deadline. You stop even if you're not done. This isn't a deadline for delivering a successful project. It's a deadline for stopping and reflecting. If you've ever used the Pomodoro technique, that's where you set a 25-minute timer and you work on one thing for 25 minutes. Then you stop and take a break and make sure that you're on the right track. A steel threads time box is kind of like a really big Pomodoro. My rule of thumb for steel threads is if you're giving yourself more than a week or two, you're probably making it too big. And if you're giving yourself less than a day, you're probably making it too small. Now, there are exceptions, of course, but in general, 1 week, maybe 2 is usually the sweet spot. Again, let's look at this in action with my YouTube video. I knew I had probably underestimated how long things would take. We usually underestimate time. I've learned to just factor that in. I also had other projects in flight, so I couldn't focus exclusively on this steel thread. Now, sometimes it is important to focus exclusively on a steel thread during your time box. It's especially true if you have a team that's using steel threads to prototype a new product or feature. Again, something we'll probably explore in future videos. In this case, I was parallelizing the steel thread alongside other work, so I figured I could work on the outline on Monday, the slides on Tuesday, record on Wednesday, edit on Thursday, then upload and share the video on Friday. 1 week for a steel thread, perfect. It also meant I could commit to my reviewers on Monday that I would be sending them something on Friday, which leads to step 4, schedule your demo when you start. This is one of the easiest things to do logistically and one of the hardest to do psychologically. I will be honest with you, I still resist doing this. Scheduling a demo when you start is powerful and scary. You're leveraging social pressure, but really it's a way to be accountable to yourself, not in the sense of, I'm going to get in trouble if I mess this up. No. I think of accountability as able to give an account, to tell the story of what happened and how. If you schedule a demo on Friday and you don't have a complete draft ready to demo, you can still tell the story. What was difficult? What did you learn? What are you going to do differently next time? If we look at how I used steel threads for these YouTube videos, you can see how it's possible to do a thin version of each step in a project. My first script was just an outline. My first slides were very boring Google Slides. Publishing didn't mean publishing to the world. It was as simple as sending a link out to a handful of trusted advisors. Now, I'm going to stop here for today, but the next couple of videos in this series are going to go deep into the topic of demos. Choosing the right audience, managing stakeholders, processing the feedback. These are really important things to get right because you can get discouraged or even derailed if you don't know how to manage demos well. So unless you're experienced with showing your work and processing feedback on really early drafts, definitely check out the next couple of videos. And in the meantime, instead of doing a full demo, you could just report on progress to an accountability buddy. You won't get as much feedback, but you'll avoid some of the pitfalls while still building momentum on your project. Okay. For today's exercise, take a whack at designing a steel thread. Pick a project you're working on or something you're thinking about tackling. Write down the steps that would make it a complete project. Aim for 5 or 6 steps if you can. The simplest, thinnest set of tasks for each step. Sometimes each step can be just 1 or 2 tasks. And then pick a time box, whether it's a week, more, less, whatever seems doable. And identify a couple of people that you trust to show a really rough version of your project to. That's your first steel thread. And if you do this and it goes completely awry, if you give yourself a week and you only get 10% of the work done. Congratulations. You've done something, you've learned something, and you get to take what you've learned and apply it to your second steel thread. If you want help figuring out how to apply this method, please check out my free masterclass that's coming up later this summer. Whether this is for your job, a side hustle, a personal project, the steel thread approach is so powerful, and I love helping people integrate this method into their work so they can bring their visions to life. Here are more details. This summer, I am offering a free masterclass on how to make better things faster with steel threads. Now, the only way to really learn a practical method like this is by doing. That's why I'm not doing a webinar. What I'm offering is a free interactive masterclass. You'll be in a Zoom call with me where you can turn on your mic and camera and get live coaching. We'll dig into where you're getting stuck and how to design steel threads for your specific challenges. Whether you're an artist, writer, teacher, coach, software engineer, product manager, a maker of any kind, this masterclass will help you get unstuck and bring your vision to life. I'm keeping class sizes small, so if this sounds exciting, sign up for a spot. Don't worry, the link is in the description below. And of course, if what I'm talking about here resonates with you, please hit subscribe and the notification bell to catch the next video in this series. That is it for today. I hope to see you in the masterclass.